Hello and welcome to the Keep It or Change Cars podcast. My name is Gugu Masuku and I'm your host. And today we're going to do something very interesting. We've been talking in studio about electric cars, EVs, the charging, and the pros and cons. But obviously we're not experts at that. And the whole idea has been to bring someone into studio who's an expert to school us and talk to us about that sort of stuff. John Ford. How's it, man?
Very good in yourself, Gugu.
Good. Thanks for coming. You're from GridCars.
That's correct.
Right? So what is GridCars all about? Because I know what it's all about, but people out there don't actually have an idea that there's an organization like the one you work for that does what you guys do.
Well, yeah, so I think to answer that question, I got to be very strategic here because it's something that's not very easy to answer. But I think in general, if you think about GridCars, we try to stick to what we say, and that is all to empower the EV revolution in South Africa, right? And that takes many, many forms. So I think if I just start from one end, it's that we are a EV public charging network that facilitates the growth of the EV industry. As we all know, people worry about range anxiety. People ask the question, can I drive to Cape Town if I actually buy an EV? And the answer is yes. And that's one part of our business.
Okay.
But another part of that is that we actually supply EV charging hardware and equipment. We manage networks on behalf of third parties, not just ourselves.
So is that for private individuals or is that the public ones?
So that is for public as well as private.
Okay.
And remember, as this industry grows, it's going to infiltrate not only the automotive side, but there would be a massive part in the logistics side, as trucks start to actually transition. So it's not just the public side that, most people look at, the passenger car market, but we develop the technologies that will support all of these different industries. And like I said, it is the hardware, it's the software and back-end solutions that run the hardware. So that's what we call in the industry is called a CPO or charge point operator. And then another thing that EV drivers will actually come into contact with is our EMSP services, which is e-mobility service provider. You can think of that as being the app that EV drivers will interact with, as well as the charge card that they will have in their pockets that they can go and swipe at any public charging station, or again, they can use that app to authorize charging sessions.
Okay, before we get there, I think what I want to know is, obviously, I feel like GridCars is like the pioneer or the leader in terms of infrastructure in the country. Is that correct?
You could say that, yes.
Yeah, you guys have quite a few. How many GridCars charging stations are there in South Africa?
All right, so let me just backtrack and actually talk about the different types of chargers, right? Yeah. You have to obviously make a quite large distinction between public versus private.
Okay,
also,
let's go public.
AC and DC, right? So I'll give you a big number because remember these numbers are changing all the time.
Constantly.
If I talk about public charging, a mixture of AC and DC, excluding dealerships, because remember dealerships have also started installing public chargers.
Do you guys do the dealership ones as well?
Well, let's put it like this. Yes, we have done some of them, not all of them.
Yes.
However, we are an operator of a large portion of charging stations at the dealerships.
Yeah.
Right, so I'll actually break those numbers down for you. So if we just talk about how many public charging stations there are for people to use that are not actually including the dealer charges, you're probably looking in the region of about 180 to 185. Right?
Across the country?
Across the country.
It's a lot.
Now remember, that's a charging station. And remember, there are numerous plugs on a charging station.
Okay, so that's a different story altogether because John and I were chatting as he came in here and I was just relaying to him my experience having driven an electric car and being frustrated trying to charge this vehicle at one of their charging stations at GridCars and realizing that the thing I have to charge with doesn't fit into the car, going to another station and realizing the same thing. So there's two types, right? AC and DC mainly.
Correct.
Please explain.
Okay, so I think let's then jump into that because I think that will put many people to rest. But just, a disclaimer, it might sound difficult right now, but this will become common knowledge really soon. Most people didn't know, turbos, non-turbos, automatic. These are now very common. But with charging, it will become common knowledge. So in a broad term, AC charging is the slower type of charging, right? You are going to probably use this type of charging for 80 to 90% of your overall charging. Because this is what you'll be doing at your own home, in your garage. If you live in a big development, there would be AC public charging stations in the parking lots there. Possibly at your business park, there will be AC charging stations, and there are AC charging stations actually attached to the public DC stations as well.
Okay.
Right. So one thing to remember, it's pretty much slower, but there are advantages to that. It's much more
Okay, so it
affordable
takes
to
longer for the car to charge on an AC
Correct.
Charging station.
Correct.
What are we looking at roundabout?
So it really does depend on three factors,
Yeah.
right? There's obviously a battery size that you're charging. You can think of that as the fuel tank size. An 80-liter tank is going to take a little bit longer to fill up
than
than
a 45.
20. Yeah, exactly that. So if you look at the battery size of the vehicle, we can use an example of let's call it a 44 kilowatt hour battery pack, just for this example, right?
Yeah.
Now, if this car that has the 44 kilowatt hour battery pack could charge at 22 kilowatts AC. Okay, now this is the maximum, and we can dig into it if you'd like, but 22 kilowatts is usually the maximum for AC.
Okay.
If that vehicle could charge at that charge rate, it would fill up, so to say, 22 kilowatts per hour.
Okay.
And so therefore, those 44 kilowatt hours will be filled within 2 hours. Always plus minus. There's some things that will obviously change the timing slightly, but as a rough estimate, it would be in that region.
Okay, so that would be 2. Okay, so that's how you do the maths on that.
Yeah. Now, and I mean, you'd see most vehicles in South Africa, their AC charge rate is about 11 kilowatts. So even if the charger is able to provide the 22 kilowatts.
So it
that
also
car will only
still
accept
depends on the
11.
vehicle. It's not just the charger.
Correct.
Wow.
And that's why if you look at a car, right, you'll find that battery size. You'll find an AC charge rate, but you'll also find a DC charge rate.
So it's so many factors, basically. It's not just one factor to consider.
Correct.
Very
But it's
interesting.
luckily easy because if you look at the specs, instead of now looking, 2-liter, 4-cylinder, no non-turbo, naturally aspirated, okay, great. You've got a normal 6-speed gearbox. You'll now know that this becomes a fundamental part of it. You'll have a 120 kilowatt motor, so now you know your power, the Newton meters of torque, sure. But you're also going to ask, what type of charging capability does this car have? What's the AC rate? What's the DC rate?
Okay.
And how big is this battery pack?
Right.
Because again, this becomes a big part of your buying decision. People will start to understand that, you know what, they don't need a car that's got 110 kilowatt hours because it's too big. They really won't use it. And remember, a bigger battery pack takes longer to charge.
But then does it not mean that if you've got a bigger battery pack, you've got more range? Does that not equate?
Definitely. But remember, you're also adding weight. You're
Yes,
adding
absolutely.
a lot of, let's call it, the retail price will inflate just slightly with a bigger battery pack.
Yeah.
And again, most people will realize that they don't actually use all of that battery. They really don't.
I was saying to John, I was saying to you before we started that I had a Mercedes-Benz EQA reviewing, because I review cars as well, and it came with the range of 380 kilometers, and I drove it for 6 days, didn't have to charge it once. Not once. 6 days driving every day. Right?
So, and I think that's what it comes down to. People will start to realize that what I really want is a battery size that caters for my real world needs. Okay. Because now you're maximizing the convenience, because when you actually have to go to Cape Town or you drive to Durban and you use a DC charger, again, which is a lot quicker now, your charge time drops a lot because you don't actually have to charge all the way to full, for example, or, but it makes sense. So you're going to want a car. I'm going to use a car that's not in South Africa just yet.
Yeah.
The Kia EV6, for example, that has got 2 different battery sizes. If you look in the European market, it's a smaller battery pack. I believe it's in the region of 55 kilowatt hours. And then there's also a bigger battery pack version. Now, in my opinion, I would personally love the smaller battery pack.
Yeah.
Because first of all, it'll probably provide me with 300 to 350 kilometers of range, which is
enough.
more than what I need.
Yeah.
Right. And when I get to the end of that, I won't stop because I have to charge. I'll stop because I need to go to the bathroom and grab a cup of coffee. And while I do those things I would have done in any case, that car has an 800 volt battery, right? The architecture is 800 volts, which means it's got a really high speed DC charging. So by the time I've done those things I would have done, all of a sudden the car's back to where I needed to be to continue my journey. And so now, even on long distance travel, I'm not really going to be inconvenienced by charging. Not at all.
Need advice? Visit changecars.co.za and click on the Keep It or Change Cars tab. Okay, so let's talk about long distance travel, because that's normally the argument from the general public. Oh, but can it drive from here to Durban? From what I understand, there's enough charging infrastructure on the N3 to get you there.
100%. And I mean, I think this is the perfect now time to explain DC charging, right? So 11 kilowatts, most of the time that's your AC rate on South African EVs, can go up to 22. It's due to the onboard charger in the car. DC charging is a lot quicker. Okay. You would most likely find that most EVs can at least and at minimum do 50 kilowatts DC.
50 kilowatts
50 kilowatts.
hour. Oh, that's the charging rate.
And that's minimum.
That's a lot.
Right. So now you're looking at the average car that can do, let's say, 100 kilowatts. Some can do 150. Some can do 200.
Jeez.
And so now all of a sudden you can see how this starts to change. But to answer your question then directly, going to Durban, yes, there are at the moment 6 DC fast chargers in between Joburg and Pietermaritzburg.
That should be enough.
There are 100%. And remember, there are numerous connectors on those stations.
Okay.
There are AC stations on those, let's call it on those same stations. There are AC connectors. And there are other AC stations as well. So, for example, at Montrose, there's a Protea Hotel. And they actually have a dedicated AC public charging station right there. So for their guests, if they'd like to stay over because maybe they don't like to do 600 kilometers a day, you do get people who just, enjoy the trip. They can actually plug their car in. Next morning, they'll wake up, get back in the car, fully charged with that AC system there. So correct, there are many connectors and people don't have to worry where they are because again, they'll have an app on their phone which will communicate live statuses of charge points.
Are there any charging stations before Montrose? Because I understand Montrose is sort of the halfway point to Durban. Is there anything before that and after that?
There is. So the first one you'll actually drive past, because most likely you won't stop there. But if you want to, is at Villiers.
Yes.
So Villiers is one. I know that there's a public DC station at Tandetau as well.
Tandetau.
I think there's a Sasol filling station there with a little OK place and there's a little restaurant.
Yes, seen it.
So there's a public charging station there. The next one, I believe, let's quickly have a look because there is a public station.
Interesting. I mean, you talk about all of this, and I was driving this Mercedes, while you have a look there, this Mercedes-Benz EQA, and you can go into the screen of that thing, into the menu, and say, search for charging stations near me. And it brings them all up. And I'm like, what? Like literally, if I'm here in Rosebank, it just brings everything up that's near me. That's a really, really cool thing, in my opinion.
So, I mean, a big part of what we do is, we've got a mapping service and we also put all the information that we've got, we share that with different mapping sites. So, for example, the in-car mapping systems, be it here or whatever the provider, we share our information to them so that can feed directly into the navigation systems of vehicles. As you know, most people don't actually use that. They just use Google Maps.
Yeah, on the phone.
So that being said, we are, there's one of their sub-Saharan African partners. So we actually share our information directly to Google Maps. And so if you click on one of the charging stations, it won't just be a pin drop. It is actually a EV charging station. It'll show you the charging speed and all of that. But that being said, the place where you will get the most information is the Charge Pocket web app that we've
So there's
developed.
An app.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that web app will actually provide you with live information. So if it is available, it's going to show you its screen.
That's nice.
If someone else is plugged in, it'll show you that someone else is charging right there.
That's nice.
And you can click on it so it can notify you when they are going to be done.
Oh, wow.
It also provides things like pricing, speeds,
so
if
tell me,
it's unavailable.
Are there different prices to this thing? I mean, if I charge in Rosebank versus at Montrose, am I paying different fares?
So, yes, remember, the public network consists of different networks. It's actually not just one owner. I mean, we mentioned earlier how many GridCars stations are there. We own about 80% of the public DC network in South Africa. So that being said, there are other networks out there and you'll have access to them. We do not want to do what they did in Europe, where you've got different networks and it's a closed off systems where you need different memberships and different cards to gain access. No. That's not how we're going to get certain farmers with their, big diesel buckies to actually get into an EV, right? You need to make it as convenient as possible for the customer, correct? So there are different networks out there. There will be different pricing. Some are even free. right? And all this information is provided to people upfront. So what I can say, and I think we can even maybe talk about, usage patterns here and how much that will then cost you. But if we are talking public network, and I will say worst case scenario right now, for the most expensive DC charge that you will find in South Africa right now is R7.35 per kilowatt hour.
It's nothing.
Well, it's just going to be
compared to fuel, compared to petrol. That's really nothing.
Correct.
Right?
And R5.88 per kilowatt hour for an AC charge. Now, this again is
so
worst
DC
case
and AC
scenario.
changes. I mean, you're putting in the same juice, but the prices will be different. And I'm assuming because it's the different rates of charging, no?
Well, that first of all, yes, it's about the service. An AC charger is a lot slower, right? It's less convenient.
Yes.
But again, the charging station itself was also a lot more affordable for the network to provide to you. So again, it's, the service is a little bit cheaper for them to offer to you. And obviously, they don't need to maybe recoup as much funds. So there's that. But remember, there are a whole host of different prices. There are free charges, like I said. There's vouchering systems built into these types of things. Don't really want to get into all the detail, but the possibility for you to get free charging is there as well.
Want SA's leading insurance? Visit changecars.co.za and click on the Discovery logo. So, John, what happens if I get to a charging station, right? And someone's charging their car. The car's fully charged. They're not there. Can I pull it off and plug it into my car? How does that work?
So that would depend on a couple of things again. Certain cars, when the charging station is done, would actually release the connector.
Okay.
So, there's some EV etiquette that we will still have to get across to the consumer base. But yes, for example, if it was an i3 that was there, the charging station was done, you'd be able to unplug the vehicle because it's done. It releases the connector and you'll be able to plug in and do obviously plug in and charge your car. That being said, we are monitoring the situation. And
so sorry to cut you off there. For those who don't know, while the car's, you can't actually pull it off. I had trouble trying to pull it off, and it's locked in, right? And that's what we're referring to here.
Yes. And just again, it really is car dependent. Certain cars will actually have certain locks. There's settings in the vehicles. We are, recommending to the OEMs that, I don't want to say which OEM this is, but there was one that came in, and by default, they actually locked the cables in. And so we worked with the OEM, and part of their PDI process is they then changed that default setting to release the cable. So yes, there are instances where it would lock in. Luckily, in reality, though, we're not really seeing people being held up by these things yet. Remember, we don't have 50,000 EVs traversing South Africa just yet. The technologies we've got are capable of handling the situation. So at some stage, we might consider doing what's happening in Europe right now, where we will give you an allotted amount of time after the session finishes to come and remove your car for the next person to come and charge.
And if you don't?
And if you don't, you will just pay for that
there's
privilege.
a fine. So you're going to be forced to be...
Correct. And then people will do that. We're also working potentially on something we call queuing. But again, that closer to the time, we can maybe explain a little bit more about what that will entail and how that would work.
Okay. So let's talk about, we were chatting about the infrastructure. You were still telling me you were checking on your machine there in terms of what we have on the N3.
Yeah. So, we were talking about Villiers-Tandetau. You've got a DC station at Harrismith.
Yes.
After Harrismith, you've got Montrose, which is that AC charging station. After Montrose, we will have another DC at Tugela.
Wow.
Yeah. And we've got two on both sides of the highway. So up to 150 kilowatts, for example, on one of those. You then have Mooi River, Maritzburg, and then the next ones would all be in the Durban area.
That is exciting, John. And in my next EV, the next EV that I'll review, I'm going to do that trip.
Please.
Now that I'm informed and a lot more confident, I'm going to try the trip.
And I'll challenge you, right?
Yeah.
If you have an EV next year, February,
you
should consider driving down to Cape Town for Formula E. We did that
that'll be phenomenal. Driving to Cape Town. We did Formula E this year and it was insane. But how many charging stations? Do you have enough, basically, from here to Cape Town?
100%. So on the N1, we've got about, let's say, 12 DC fast charging stations, obviously going all the way into Cape Town.
Yes.
In Cape Town, there's many, many more. But again, you don't have to just follow the N1. You could actually go south and you can go down to PE.
And there's more.
Drive all along the coast all the way into Cape Town, correct? Which is, let's call it a scenic route.
The scenic route, yes. Now, I'm definitely going to try that. So now tell me something. From what I understand, electricity is much cheaper than petrol in terms of pound for pound and charging. What are we looking at on average? I mean, people are wondering, why would I want to switch over to an EV? I think that's one big perk for motorists, in my opinion. Petrol is not cheap.
Yeah, no, not at all. And look, it's also very volatile.
Right.
And I think if you're considering going EV, many benefits you'll receive. I mean, it's not just cheaper to run, but let's talk about fueling, right?
Yeah.
So the South African pattern, about 80 to 90% of your charging takes place in your own garage. Right. So if you look at your own electricity bill, you'll see what you're going to pay per kilowatt hour.
Is it cheaper at home?
100%.
Really?
100%. Remember, you will just be paying your normal rate. And if that is, I'm going to give you an example, 2.50 per kilowatt hour.
Yeah. Is that average or normal?
Yes, you could look at between 2.50 to 3 rand
per kilowatt hour.
For a kilowatt hour at home, depending obviously on where you live. But if you were to drive a city EV, I'm just going to use an average vehicle consumption, 18 kilowatt hours to the 100. If you drive a car like that, you pay 2.50 per kilowatt hour. You're going to look at about 45 cents a kilometer.
Jeez.
And that's just in your charging.
Jeez.
Right? Now, if you take a petrol equivalent, and I did this before, where it's a vehicle that's actually got an ICE version and an EV version. The equivalent petrol version is about, let's call it, I think it's 1 rand 35 a kilometer. So 3 times.
3 times more.
3 times more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just fueling. So now we're not talking maintenance, we need to do oil changes and these types of things. And we're also not talking something, many people don't think about depreciation really, right? Because I think there is a big question mark. What's the used car market going to look like in the future? And
also because batteries, I mean, my phone battery not dies, but the capacity reduces over time.
100%,
I would imagine the same would happen on a car.
Correct. Correct. So a battery, a lithium-ion battery, it does degrade over time.
Yeah.
And I think, many people think, oh, how long is this battery going to last, right? Luckily, we can see what's happened in Europe, and it's very reliable. Batteries don't just break. Like you said, they degrade.
What's the lifespan of a battery in a car?
So
from brand new?
What the OEMs are providing is about, let's say, between an 8 and a 10-year warranty on the battery pack, and they give out guarantees of certain performances, right?
Okay.
So they'll say, we guarantee that you'd have 80% of the original lifespan left on that battery pack after 8 or 10 years, right?
Really?
Now, that's their guarantee. And that's also worst case scenario when they say that, because they have to protect themselves when they do these things.
Yeah.
But that being said, think about this. 8 to 10 years, you might have lost 10 to 15% of your battery. What's that going to do to you? Nothing, really.
Yeah.
I mean, that battery will continue lasting for a very long time. And in certain instances, we're seeing the vehicle batteries outlasting the body of the vehicle. And
Really?
that's why OEMs are actually making sure that these batteries actually become a part of the chassis of the vehicle, because they would never have to really remove that battery. So you're going to see battery degradation. Obviously, that would also depend on how you're going to be treating that battery. Fast charging it every single day, cycling it hard, you'll see more
letting it go to empty, charging it fully.
Correct. You'll see more degradation in that instance after 10 to 15 years than if you just really took care of the battery. But again, that's just mileage differences. The car doesn't break. The car will be fine. And people really don't have to worry about that.
Looking to buy a new or used car? Visit CHANGECARS.co.za. Okay, so John, what happens when the car's like old? I mean, you've got old cars on the road, 20, 25 years old. You're still running, right? What happens to an EV at that stage? The battery's not the same as it was when it was new. Let's say it's like 50% or below. Can you go and get a new battery? How much is that going to cost? You guys know at this stage what those things are looking like?
So remember, what we know what will happen is new industries will grow. Okay. We are already seeing battery, let's call it battery recycling is a new industry that is really, really coming online now. But at the same time, repurposing of batteries. Because remember, a badly degraded EV battery pack is still a really valuable asset. If you look at a home battery system, you're looking at potentially something between 10 and 30 kilowatt hours. Okay, that's a home system. A typical EV battery pack might be 60 to 80 kilowatt hours. So if that's degraded by 30% potentially, that is a very valuable asset to maybe repurpose and use for home storage.
Oh, I see. So you
Second
can
life.
repurpose. Yes.
So there will be industries, and look, I'm obviously not an EV OEM, but I can imagine that there could be potential for them to have certain programs where they bring in older vehicles, just like Apple does with their phones, you know, and repurposing those battery packs for second life use. And maybe even after second life use, maybe then they'll start to recycle those battery packs and then reusing those materials that they can extract into the next generation of batteries. So definitely there's a lot of work still to do, you know, in that space. But at the same time, there's a lot still to do in the EV charging side as well, you know, and there are new challenges arising, but just because there are some challenges does not mean that this is not the way to go.
Doesn't mean let's slow down.
Oh, 100%. This means we should speed up, right?
Okay.
We know the benefits of going EV. We know the potential of the technology. You know, a vehicle.
So let's talk about the benefits quickly because, I think that's a big thing. And as personally, I mean, I've been against it for a while, but the more you start driving these cars, the more you start to see them for what they are. And it's like, I could live like this. Let's talk to us about the benefits of EVs.
Right. So we started off saying, you know, lower running costs. Yeah. 100%. Right.
So that's the daily running. What about the servicing and maintenance side of it?
So, you know, I actually want to ask what? What servicing?
No spark plugs, no fuel filters,
no oils. I mean, there are so few moving parts that there's less to go wrong.
Yeah.
You know, the vehicles will be checked at your local dealership. They still have brake pads. They still have, brake fuel and tires that need to be done. But again, you know, with regen braking, you're going to be using those brake pads.
You're barely going to use the brakes. I mean, that's the cool part for anyone out there who doesn't know.
It becomes like a game, right?
It is a game because you don't use your brake pedal. You don't at all. And with certain cars, I mean, I've learned with this Mercedes here that I was driving, you've got different regenerative braking modes, right, with the pedal shifters.
Yeah.
If I go one down, it really bites hard when I come off the accelerator, like it's proper braking.
Exactly.
And you don't have to use those brakes. So I can imagine, I mean, the cost of maintenance, it's going to be so minimal.
I know of someone who've, you know, they actually drive a BMW i3.
Yeah.
They, for the very first time, exchanged their brake pads or, you know, replaced them, I think it was after 110 or 120,000 kilometers.
First time.
That's how little he actually used those brake pads. And again, I think the ability to do that in your vehicle, if you're in, let's say, Joburg traffic, you know, peak time, you got maximum regen on so that you're harvesting the energy back. Your efficiency is going to be amazing when you do that because you're not using brakes. You're actually just recouping all the energy, putting that back into your battery. If you're doing long distance travel, you don't want it to brake because you want to actually keep that in movement. And so you'll just then remove that. So again, the technology allows you to really become that much more efficient. I mean, that's why a hybrid is what it is, right? You're adding electrification to an internal combustion engine vehicle to improve it. Because you're actually adding instant torque when you've got a motor. You are adding efficiency when you're adding electrification.
No, you really are.
Now, that's the bit. You're improving vehicles. But a big part of this is your vehicle at the moment is just your vehicle, right? It's going to, if you're not using it right now, it's just somewhere in a parking lot. But the technology now allows for your vehicle to potentially, you know, become a home battery pack, you know?
At some point.
Well, I mean, we've got a vehicle in South Africa that has been launched recently. That's got vehicle-to-load capability. It can just push out a couple of kilowatts for you to boil a kettle, right?
Really?
These things cannot be done really with conventional petrol cars at the same scale.
Okay, so in a country like ours with load shedding, there is potential for you to use your EV to sort of power and run certain things in the household.
There's potential for it, correct. If you look at the States, I mean, they launched the F-150 Lightning. And they had a specific pack where, you know, first of all, they've got normal sockets on the bucky where you can power your power tools and these types of things. But they also supply a whole system where they've got a home charger that doesn't only charge your bucky, but it can actually assist, you know, pulling the energy from your bucky and using it at your home. Now, again, there's a lot more that goes into this. And I think many people, when they go EV, they really start thinking about, oh, wow, I can put solar panels on my roof, right? So that means I can most likely charge my car off that? Okay, so how does this work? And look, it's a big discussion. Don't get me wrong. You got to have the right inverters, you got to have the right solar panels, you got to have the right charger. There's a lot that goes into it. But again, the technology allows to start heading into that direction. And I mean, again, there's a lot of rabbit holes to jump down here, and I won't go into it. But again, smart grids, we've got a grid that is under strain, becoming smart in how we use our energy and how we balance our grid. The cars are not just going to stay cars. There's a lot of potential for the technology to actually assist with some of the issues we've got in South Africa.
One last question, John. When there's load shedding, what happens at a charging station? Am I fine, or is it, it is what it is?
I'd like to answer this in two ways, right?
Okay.
Remember, 80 to 90% of your charging, it's at home, right?
Yes.
So if you don't have a big battery backup system and you keep your charger running throughout load shedding, that charger is going to go off. It is. But that's not a problem. Remember, your phone stays on the next morning you wake up, and it'll be the same with your EV. If you do, let's say you have a commute of 50 to 100 kilometers, that's an hour or 2 or 3 of AC charging in your garage. You're going to have 2 or 3 hours overnight to get your car back to where it was when you parked it, even with load shedding. So in that instance, load shedding doesn't faze you at all.
At home?
At home,
yeah.
Correct. If you are in the scenario where you are driving to Cape Town, okay, you keep on looking at your live map and you see, wait, load shedding, it's off.
Okay, so the map does show you that.
It'll show you it's off, right? Okay. The charging stations will say it's unavailable.
Very smart.
But remember, there's a whole list of information about that charger when you look at that map. And one of the items listed is backup.
Okay.
So there is a mixture. Some chargers won't have backup, some would. And I'll use the example of Colesberg. In Colesberg, there are 2 DC chargers on 2 different sites. The one has got backup. The other one does not. So if you do arrive there, the one will go off.
Yeah.
You'll know about it again. You are informed. But the second time, the other one, it actually has backup, and you'll be able to go and charge there.
Okay.
Correct. And we are continually working to improve the resilience of the various sites. We will, with certain updates on the app eventually down the line, add load shedding schedules so that you're even more informed. You don't have to do this manually on separate apps. So at the moment, you might have to just look at 2 different apps to know if you want to predict these things. But the fact is, you do have the information to know. And we are continually improving our support. We have a 24/7 support line as well that EV drivers can call. And if they have questions about how do they start a charge, if they don't have an account and they
can quickly just
they can
reach
talk
out
to our support team.
Wow.
Our support team will be able to get them onboarded. And even if they don't have an RFID card, which most likely they will when they get the vehicle, they'll be able to use the app to start that charging session.
It's amazing. So I think to sum it up, the whole EV thing is you've got to think and plan. I see it's fun for me. It's not as convenient as pulling up to a petrol station and just saying 200 Rand, please, or full tank, please.
Let me say one more thing, right?
Yeah.
I think it will become even more convenient. The only reason why in certain areas it's not convenient is because, remember, we've had probably 3-4 years of a EV charging network growth with no real EV market, right? We've got over 100 years of filling stations and networks that have developed. We are moving into an era where EV charging is going to be more convenient because charging comes to where you are. Think about your day-to-day. You're going to have a charger at your home. You're going to have a charger at your business
office.
park at the office. You're going to have a charger in the parking lot at the Woolworths, the spa, the gym. It will be where you are. And when you go into the public network, right now, because of the amount of EVs we've got, you will be charging on the charging stations that are there. But we are moving to a future where you've got big EV forecourts, where you have hundreds of connectors at one big location. And you won't really have all the issues of convenience that you have, or that some people perceive that they
I
have
think
today.
it's a perceived inconvenience because I think ultimately, you charge at home. You get home, you just like you do your phone, you plug your car in and you're good to go the next day.
You forget about it.
You forget about it.
And you've got apps so you can monitor sessions live,
No,
whether it's
I
public
don't really,
or home.
I don't think it's an inconvenience. I think the only planning or quote unquote inconvenience would be doing long distance, because then you have to plan and see, okay, But it's on a
And remember,
major
it's early
hassle.
days.
Hey?
Right? It's early days,
early
right
days,
now.
yeah,
It's only going to get better from here. And I think that's what people need to know. You know, maybe right now you would feel like you want 20 charges on the N3. First of all, it's not necessary yet.
Don't have that many
Yet.
cars on there. Yeah.
Exactly. But remember, we are improving the technology, we're improving the experience every single day. And by the time the conventional South African decides, I'm going to go EV, the experience would have moved forward from where it is already today. And it will become even more convenient because you don't have to talk to people if you didn't want to.
John, it's been insightful. Thank you so much for coming. John Ford
Only
from
a pleasure.
GridCars, ladies and gents. And I think this there's so much more to talk about. So I think we are likely going to do a part 2 of this.
Fantastic.
Right?
Sign me up.
Lovely. Happy days. And thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you found value in this episode. I certainly did. I learned a lot. If you need any motoring advice, email us at podcast@changecars.co.za. Anything at all, any topics that you may want us to talk about, like this whole electric thing, email us. And if you're looking for a car, get onto changecars.co.za. If you need insurance, we're affiliated with Discovery, which is the best. So click on the Discovery tab and get yourself an obligation-free quote. For South Africa's best motoring content, catch all things motoring on DSTV channel 189 and on YouTube. New episodes every week.